Hello and welcome to Spencer's Library. I'm Claudia, and earlier this year I bought this gorgeous face mask. And if you told me 11-12 years ago as a newly minted adult that I would once willingly buy something so girly, well, first of all, I would have asked you what a hellish dystopian future lies ahead of me where a face mask suddenly becomes a staple part of our wardrobe. But I also would have asked you if you'd lost your mind because this is pink. And I have the feeling that lots of millennials watching this will recognize that feeling. Growing up as a girl of my generation, 1991 checking in, you pretty much had two options. You were either a tomboy or you were a girly girl. You were either her or you were her. There's nothing in between. I really hope that young girls today are less narrow-minded growing up than I was. Because I was definitely her. And the problem was not that I didn't like pink, even though it goes awesomely well with my colouring and undertones. 15 years ago, much like today, I preferred to be clothed in all black, which back then made me stand out somewhat as a goth-type teenager. Today it just makes me look a little bit boring in my fashion choices. So the problem was not my choice of clothing, but it was the way that I judged other girls that didn't make the same choices as I did. Girls that chose to look like her. And obviously I didn't just pull this judgmental attitude of traditionally feminine clothing out of my gothy arse. I simply came to the conclusion that society around me seemed to despise women and feminine things so much that they must simply be inferior. Internalized misogyny. You were waiting for me to drop that term, weren't you? And here it is. Internalized misogyny. One hell of a drug. And by the way, I realize when I talk about these concepts such as femininity and masculinity, I'm talking about very generalized aesthetics and cultural ideas here, which are complex and problematic all by themselves. In this case, those concepts are simply a kind of a shorthand for certain characteristics and ideas that in our society we understand as a binary, masculine and feminine. So I want to point out that this video is about aesthetic and not about gender expression or about gender identity, since I personally have never questioned my identity as a girl and a woman. And so, growing up, I continued to feel superior to girls who wore pink, jewelry, makeup, nail polish, you name it, I was probably judging you. In a way, to be kind to my former self, one could argue that this was a kind of a rebellion against the patriarchy, but unfortunately appropriating and adopting the harmful ideas of the patriarchy. What can I say? Not the most intelligent idea. I wasn't a very thoughtful teenager, as you can probably guess by now. So the problem wasn't that I wasn't wearing makeup. The problem was that I was judging the girls who do, and that I felt superior to them for not wearing makeup. The problem wasn't that I wasn't wearing any jewelry. The problem was my completely irrational hatred of the one girl in my school year who wore pearls on a regular basis. The problem wasn't that I preferred black to pink. The problem was that I interpreted this colour preference as anything more than a simple colour preference. What I'm talking about here is not groundbreaking or new, it's not a new discourse, but it is something that I think a lot of people who grew up being seen as female can identify with. The not like other girls phenomenon is something that, especially in pop culture in the last decade or so, has been addressed and has been talked about and has been understood as a harmful idea. And what I want to add to this conversation is simply my own personal experience. So how did I get out of that phase? Was it just me growing up and becoming an adult? Maybe, but I think there's other factors at play. One experience that helped me out of this horribly toxic mindset was going to a university where I was in the minority. I went to study classical guitar at a small conservatoire where I was one of, at various times, between 2 and 4 women in a class of otherwise all men. And that really sucked. But I guess one good thing that came out of it is that spending so much time around men all of the time made me want to impress them less. Masculinity, when observed close up and being surrounded by it all the time, really does lose its glamour. And honestly, any group that's made up of majority men is a pain to be around, but particularly when that group is all guitarists. Think of your favourite male lead guitarist in a band, and now multiply that sheer ego and big-headedness by a dozen, and you kind of understand the environment that I found myself in. Being surrounded by a group of men who all thought themselves the hottest new thing, the cross between Mozart and Jimi Hendrix, really made me seek comfort in femininity like I never had before. I began wearing nail polish on my mismatched, horribly abused guitarist's hands, much to the disapproval of my male guitar teachers. I started experimenting with makeup and haven't really stopped since. And I gave in to my love for retro pop music and stopped pretending that I enjoyed death metal. And suddenly, in this intensely masculine environment that I found myself in, the conscious choice of femininity started feeling like the rebellious choice. But it would still take another decade from that point until now for the pendulum to swing back into the position where I don't feel like my aesthetic choices are purely reactionary to my surroundings. And in a way, I am still working on that. One of my hobbies, at least pre-pandemic, has been playing Magic the Gathering. This is a nerdy collecting card game which Bill and I started playing together about 7 or 8 years ago. Even now at Magic events and tournaments in particular, women are always in the minority. And I often found myself the only woman in the room. So I started to dress up for tournaments. I started to wear very glam, shiny, sparkly makeup and nail polish. I kind of thought of that almost as a battle uniform. However, I am still uncomfortable with many traditionally feminine coded things, such as dancing. Really uncomfortable with that. But I do like baking, and I do like knitting, and I do like putting my eyeshadow on. It doesn't really need saying, but obviously as a society we need to dismantle this coding of hobbies, activities and aesthetics as masculine or feminine. But until that happens, while we still associate certain colours and hobbies and types of music to masculine and feminine, we need to at least stop assigning moral values to them. And I'm still working on that shift in perspective in myself. So what I want to know from you is if you have undergone a similar shift, if you used to be not like other girls, and your own personal journey of getting out of that mindset. Let me know in the comments. However, I want to just mention that I'm mostly interested in the opinions of people who grew up perceived as female. I am really not that interested in the opinion of cis men in this discussion because, frankly, it's not about you. Anyway, thank you for watching. Bye!